Check, hello.
Hello. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Take your seats. I think we are going to start with our session. Um, I would like to welcome you all to the Rio Conventions Pavilion on the Synergies Day. And it's great that you found your way here. My name is Nina Bisom. I'm the coordinator of the Economics of Land Degradation Initiative, and I will be the moderator of this event today. Let us have a quick look at the agenda. So I will give a quick introduction to the topic, and then we will hear a keynote speech on a study in Rwanda, which is called The Economics of Harmonized Land Restoration Targets, and then followed by a panel discussion where we will look at the options and challenges to enable synergies at countries level between the Rio Conventions. And then hopefully later on we will have some time to do a Q&A with the audience about the topic. So who are the co-hosts of the session? So it's the UNCCD, which is the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. It is one of the 3 Rio Conventions, and it is a binding international agreement on land and the framework to combat desertification, land degradation, and droughts. And the UNCCD aims to neutralize land degradation by 2030. And this concept of land degradation neutrality, the LDN, is anchored in SDG 15.3 since 2015. And UNCCD is co-hosting this event together with the Economics of Land Degradation Initiative, which is a global initiative and a network of senior experts and scientists, mainly financed by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and the secretariat is hosted by GIZ. And we are working in partnership with our institutions who form part of this network. ELD builds bridges between science and policy with economic analysis and scenarios. And we're aiming to integrate the true costs of unsustainable land use, degrading land, and the true value of land into decision-making processes. So we are making the economic case for sustainable land management, and we show that investing in restoring and maintaining land resources pays off. So land is a common denominator of the Rio targets of the 3 Rio Conventions. So our title today is Maximizing Synergies Among Rio Conventions to Accelerate the Biodiversity, Climate, and Land Agendas. So the graphic of the UNCCD Global Land Outlook from 2022 shows it very nicely, how the 3 target systems of the Rio Conventions thematically overlap, and that targets on conserving, sustainably managing, and restoring land forms like the core overlap of these 3 target systems. And this is where the potential for synergies is the greatest. Each of these conventions, they have their strategic action plans in countries. So the NDCs, the National Adaptation Programs for Action, the NB subs, and the LDN targets, they all pursue targets on sustainable land management, on land restoration. And countries at the same time are challenged by the implementation of their national targets. They're only able to achieve these targets if they pursue these and implement them in a harmonized and coherent manner, so that synergies become possible to reduce costs and maximize the returns of joint action. But in reality, instead, those implementing processes happen in a rather siloed way. There is not a true connection between these processes. The interlinkage is insufficient, with the effect that you lack efficiency and synergy effects remain very low. So there is a challenge, however, to integrate those processes. It's for several reasons. We will discuss this today as well, and we will see from the preliminary results of the Rwanda study where those challenges are and how multiple they are. But just to give you an example, that it already starts at target systems themselves and the way targets are formulated, indicators are formulated, even parameters or baselines differ. And you can see that on the example of Nepal. I put it here on the slide. You can see to compare land degradation neutrality target of Nepal, and at the same time in parallel the NDC, which also targets has a target on soil quality, soil health, but which is looking at soil organic matter instead of soil organic carbon from the LDN target, which is not exactly the same. I mean, they are very strongly linked to each other, but soil carbon is just a part of soil organic matter. So it makes it difficult to compare and to jointly monitor progress in these targets with each other. And then also the indicators, they are not comparable with each other, so they don't speak to each other in that sense. One is looking at a percentage of increase of soil organic carbon per year, while the NDC is having a quantified target on an absolute average of 3.95% altogether, all the way to 2030. So these monitoring systems of the conventions and the agendas need to be harmonized with each other somehow, so that it becomes possible to show and to calculate how efforts to implement one target pays into the achievement of the other target, which definitely is the fact, but it's just not being monitored because you don't have a joint and harmonized monitoring system. So this is only one of the challenges we see if we want to bring synergies at national level forward. So without further ado, I would like to invite Alisha Mirzabayev from the University of Bonn to present his preliminary results of the Rwanda study. Maybe just to introduce you to the study itself, why we are conducting the study. It has been decided also in a joint event with the 3 Rio Convention secretariats by the beginning of this year, when we talked about synergies and why it is so difficult to bring synergies forward between those conventions. And we thought it would be helpful to have a deeper look into one country as an example to analyze, so what are the challenges and where are potential synergies to bring these efforts forward to increase efficiency and to reduce transaction costs in the implementation of these 3 agendas. So we started this study, and now we have preliminary results. I'm looking forward to hear. So I hand over to Alisha.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nina. Welcome everybody to our session. And thank you very much for attending our session despite fierce competition from the World Cup starting soon. But before that, let me start talking about our ongoing work in Rwanda. And the purpose of this work is to find what are the opportunities for different actors, particularly the 3 Rio Conventions, who have land restoration objectives in all countries to have some sort of better synergies from their activities. First of all, in the case of Rwanda, we can see from this table that Rwanda has several commitments, targets for land restoration under LDN and under NDCs and under the Bond Challenge, and probably at some point also under the Biodiversity Convention. But one thing I would like to draw your attention is that the total area of Rwanda is 2.6 million hectares, and its already commitments are 2.7 million hectares. So that means that these commitments cannot be separate from each other in case of Rwanda. They are overlapping. One important challenge in this overlapping story is that we don't know geographic locations of where these restorations will be exactly carried out. So that's, I think, a very important thing that needs to be kept in mind moving forward. So when we talk about land degradation, so we are restoring degraded land. So when we talk about land degradation, we need to have in mind that there are 2 types of land degradation. We can classify them into 2 broad categories. One that happens through land use and land cover change. For example, when we are cutting down trees in a forest, we are leading to deforestation, and that forest is becoming a barren land or pasture land, we are changing the land use or land cover. So this is one way of land degradation, when high value ecosystem is turned into a lower value ecosystem. Another category of land degradation happens without land use change. Imagine croplands are suffering from soil erosion. You are continuing with your cropping activities, but yields are going down because your soil fertility is going down because of land degradation, or because of salinity, or because of other things. The same thing in pastures. Pastures may be continuing being used as pastures, but because of overgrazing, their productivity is going down. And that's also land degradation. So here we can see two types, the categories of land degradation that are most salient, prominent in Rwanda. One is deforestation. Second is soil erosion, soil fertility loss in croplands, and overgrazing, loss of productivity in pastures, also related to leading to soil erosion. When we calculated what are the costs of this land use change-based degradation, we find across different locations, so this small dot you see in the screen, pixel, is 25 hectares. So we are looking at each 25 hectares and identifying what are the costs of land degradation that happens in each of these locations. And it's on average annually during the last 2 decades, it's about $37 million that Rwanda is losing because of land degradation through land use change, deforestation, for example, primarily in Rwanda. This is one type. So when we calculate what it takes to restore these degraded lands, we come up with a number which is $164 million US dollars. So this is what we are comparing now. But of course, once we invest this $164 million, the benefits of this will be happening across many, 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 many years. That's why it's still a profitable investment. Now let us look at soil erosion, so land degradation, which happens without land use change in croplands. Rwanda is one of the countries which have very good analytical work behind all this thing. A lot of studies on economics, on soil erosion, other things. So only soil erosion is leading to $38 million US dollars through lower agricultural productivity, $810 million through loss of topsoil, and $73 million US dollars in additional fertilizer costs. So once your soil is becoming less fertile, to have the same yield, you need to apply more fertilizer, and that's increasing your cost. And so this is adding up to some big number. And cost of anti-erosion measures, so agroforestry, doing terraces, doing all these activities, is $513 million US dollars, as calculated by EUCN and Rwandan government agencies. So now, let us add these things up. So we have, in terms of cost of land degradation, in total, we have 921, and then cost of action. So what it takes for us to restore degraded land, 677 million. So even at this stage, you can see that it is a profitable investment option. Every dollar invested in soil restoration, ecosystem restoration, land restoration is giving you back $1 and plus 36 cents. And this is very, I think, makes economic sense to invest. But then the question for us today, how increasing synergies across the 3 Rio Conventions can accelerate land restoration in Rwanda. And Rwanda is, for us, is just one case study country, so we would like to have a broader lessons learned for other countries as well. Today is a synergies day, so everybody understands synergies in their different ways, and that's normal. For me, I'm an agricultural economist, so I understand synergies in a more kind of measurable way. What is synergies? Synergies should lead to either increased effectiveness, so that means together we are able to do something we cannot do separately, or synergies need to lead to increased efficiency, so that means collaboration helps us to restore each hectare of land at a lower cost. So that's synergies for me, and that's how I'm defining synergies in this context. We can, of course, discuss during question and answer session what synergies could mean, what other things synergies could mean. So let's go to these costs, which seem to be essential for achieving those synergies if we are increasing efficiency through collaboration. So we have something called establishment costs. So this is about planting baby trees, constructing terraces, and we know what it costs. So depending on what you do, it ranges from 221 to 1,500 in Rwanda. So if you do very expensive like terraces, it's more expensive. If you do, let's say, conservation agriculture, mulching, or crop diversification, it can be less expensive. So depending on what is needed in every land, so this is the range of establishment costs. But once we reestablish, or plant that tree, we cannot just go away and say, oh, job is done and everything is perfect. No, we need to have maintenance costs. We need to make sure that we are taking care of that baby tree for some time at least. Yeah, there are recurring annual costs, and you can see them as well here, which is also a kind of range depending on what exactly you have in mind. This part is well known. Now, maybe if you asked 10 years ago, what are those costs, there was a kind of knowledge gap. Now, there is really no knowledge gap on that. In most locations, we have a pretty good idea of these establishment and maintenance costs. But what is a little known, because it is hidden besides all that, are organizational costs, transaction costs. So we are doing a land restoration program. What it costs to organize all that? What are the research, information, design, implementation? So you see some of those examples of this kind of transaction costs, awareness raising, monitoring and evaluation, enforcement. So that part is not really discussed a lot, and there is much less information now, but we also try to find those costs in the case of Rwanda, because that's where we have a more margin for action. 1 ton of cement, if one sapling, baby tree, costs a certain amount of money, you can reduce by building a bigger nursery, perhaps by economies of scale, but you cannot reduce that much. But when it comes to transaction costs, by collaborations, you can really have probably bigger impact. Now, if you look around the world, these are existing studies from around the world, and the extent of transaction costs ranges a lot, but from up to 68%. In case of Rwanda, when we look at this exactly ecosystem restoration activities, transaction costs are about 25% by the Rwanda Environmental Management Authority. So this is probably kind of our baseline, but probably those transaction costs, even for Rwanda, are higher than this, because they do not yet take into account, for example, all these costs by Rio Conventions when they want to do their activities in Rwanda yet. So if you look inside this 25%, what are those costs? So monitoring and enforcement comes up first. So a big part about monitoring and enforcement. Research and capacity building, and then awareness raising, coordination, administration, funding, mobilization. So this is the structure that we have in terms of these transaction costs, hidden costs of land restoration. Now let us translate this to our table, and we can see that the costs for restoring each hectare of degraded land can range in total, taking into account this transaction cost, from 423 to 2,600 something, 88, yeah? So these are for each hectare. So what I propose is the main channel for synergies would come through reducing these costs. Yeah? Through reducing these costs, making restoration less costly. Now, we look through all the process of how land restoration occurs in Rwanda. So every step from A to Z. So first you need to come with design of land restoration targets. That's where LDN target setting comes in, for example. And then you have other stages like advocacy and awareness raising, mobilizing funds, planning, implementation. So if you look at this structure, you can clearly see that, of course, 80% is actual on the groundwork, on planting trees, on building terraces and other things. But then there are different parts. So what I suggest, and we can discuss that, that's also the purpose of this side event. I suggest the two areas where it makes most sense, where it is most effective for Rio Conventions to collaborate, is number 1 and number 5, at the beginning and at the end. At the beginning, when we are designing land restoration targets, remember from the first table on Rwanda, we had all these hectares, and we don't know where they are located exactly. Yeah, so coming up with one coherent joint process of mapping these land restoration areas and having this map before our eyes for all the 3 conventions and also perhaps for other actors like the Bonn Challenge. And that would, I think, would be one area where collaboration pays off. And as a matter of fact, I don't think without collaborating here on number 1, conventions will be able to achieve their objectives in a coherent way. So that's what it is both needed and necessary. Here at this stage, one can also include other dimensions, like we are now in Biodiversity Convention COP, like remember in Rwanda didn't have biodiversity land restoration targets. So it makes sense to integrate at this design stage already to all these LDN or NDC land restoration processes biodiversity targets. And next area where this collaboration between conventions will be really very much needed and effective, and which will pay off, is monitoring and evaluation for many reasons. One, nowadays remote sensing technologies allow us to count every tree with artificial intelligence and all the different things. We can really go to very high resolution mapping and monitor all what's happening, but not all countries will be able to do that on their own, one. And second, and probably most important factor in that, we need to have an independent authority, independent actor doing the monitoring and evaluation, especially when we are talking about commitments. So imagine a project manager in any not only Rwanda, anywhere. Would he say that his project failed? Nowhere, no way. I mean, everybody will report that their project is working perfectly, but we need independent evaluation and monitoring. And that needs to happen also beyond project time. Now we have an idea that, okay, we plant a tree, we did a restoration. No, when we plant a tree, we didn't do restoration, we planted a tree. Restoration happens if that baby tree survives to the age of 30, 40, 50 and starts really bringing its full potential in terms of ecosystem services. Until then, restoration did not happen. So monitoring needs to happen for all these years, and it's beyond any single specific project. Yeah. So that's where I think collaboration will pay off very well. And it's not only about payoff, not only about efficiency, it's also about effectiveness. Without collaboration there, it will be very difficult to achieve convention's objectives. And we can discuss that later on today. Now, that was on the, okay, that was, these yellow things are for the conventions level. We are also looking into how national organizations inside Rwanda will be able to increase their synergies, effectiveness, and efficiency. So 80%, of course, imagine, are happening still there. There is also big opportunities for that. I will not talk too much on that today because of time and other. But here I just give some impression of the land restoration institutional mapping of Rwandan actors and all different partners. So one aspect would be bringing together all land restoration related information in one place and providing, it's important, providing public access to it. If it's information exists somewhere and then it's locked up and you need to, it's not a good way of unleashing all the creativeness of different actors. So information needs to be provided to public access. Coordinated funding mobilization. There are already working groups, as far as I know, 2 or 3 working groups on land restoration. So some sort of land restoration working group, so maybe based on what already exists. And what is one thing I was personally kind of learned from this case study is that when you talk about land restoration in different countries, it is different. In Rwanda, the action will happen in croplands or pasture lands, simply because this is where most of the land degradation is happening. So that means that food security and agrobiodiversity dimensions need to be also more salient than probably they are right now. So my concluding slide, my key messages, how Rio Conventions could collaborate and create synergies in land restoration, joint mapping of lands for restoration across the Rio Conventions and other initiatives, not only Rwanda, but across the world. Integration of biodiversity targets within existing land restoration commitments. That makes sense a lot for Rwanda. Instead of coming up with a whole new set of things, perhaps already there are commitments, why don't integrate some biodiversity strong conditions there, like 30%, 50% of trees need to be indigenous, and not like this now, when 50% is eucalyptus, or something like this. Other conditions, like when you are starting a project, you need to do a benchmark evaluation of biodiversity, and then when you are monitoring and evaluating at the end, you need this benchmark to check, did your project increase biodiversity in this location or not? So that kind of integration. And of course, joint monitoring and evaluation system, tracking achievement of land restoration. Imagine, Sasha, you have a state of land restoration report published every year when everyone is waiting, and then they are saying, okay, this year we had a huge progress on restoration in this country. Here's where we need to do. So that would be, I think, a fantastic idea to have that sort of monitoring system. Thank you very much.
No. I had to, okay, wrong bottom. Okay. Thank you, Alicia, for these very interesting preliminary results. I should underline here that the study is still ongoing, looking more in detail into the potential of efficiency gains through better coordination of these processes in Rwanda, and we will be presenting the final results then in March or April next year. But what struck me very much is actually this institutional map. Sorry, this is not readable, certainly for you back there in the room. But maybe that doesn't matter so much. I mean, the picture itself is already talking for itself, you know, and this is only related to land restoration processes in Rwanda. And look how many actors and institutions are involved in this, and how many flashes you have going from there to there. And you see, it's not at all a kind of coordinated way of talking, communicating with each other among these different actors. So I wanted to just have a last look at this picture because it's really striking. And what also is an interesting question we've been discussing during this setup of the study is when each of the conventions result for one country context in targets for land restoration, and this country commits to a certain amount of hectares to be restored, does that mean that this is indigenous? So you have the number of land to be restored under the NDC and under the LDN targets, and then NB sub, is that additional, or is it rather overlapping, and how and in which sense? So this is what this map, Alicia, is, this joint map he's suggesting really makes sense, where the conventions and the countries work with one integrated joint monitoring system on scale. So yeah, it's thank you very much for this very interesting insights. So I would like to give you the opportunity to react on what we've just heard. Maybe you have questions, you want to challenge Alicia a little bit with regards to his findings. So that would be the moment right now to raise your hand, and we would give you the opportunity to speak up.
Good morning, Pierluigi Bossi, coordinator of the International University Network on Cultural and Biological Diversity. I arrived at 9:23, so I don't know exactly what you presented previously. Anyway, this case of Rwanda is very, very interesting. This approach is very, very interesting. 3 comments, and we will continue our interactions next time and next weeks. It is very interesting. First of all, at the theoretical and applied level, we should consider, and we work on these issues. This one is the premise, and we are few working on these issues. We should consider that policy coordination, it means in economic terms, public sectors and public sector interventions coordination has multiple challenges and benefits in terms of transaction costs, not only transaction costs, but also information asymmetries. Information asymmetries are direct information asymmetries and indirect information asymmetries. It means information asymmetries are also linked with the transaction cost. So the reduction of information asymmetries in itself is a benefit, and it reduces the costs, but at the same time, the reduction of some information asymmetries is an indirect driver to reduce other transaction costs, first of all. Second, when we discuss about the coordination of public sectors, international public sectors, I consider, and we consider in our theoretical and methodological approach, the international conventions, multilateral environmental agreements, and the 500 multilateral environmental agreements, plus the agencies, plus the regional and sub-regional bodies as the international public sector. So if we consider the international public sector and the national and local public sectors, we discover that synergies and coordination can dramatically reduce costs, not only transaction costs, but other costs in terms of traditional economies of scales, networking economies, dynamic economies. Dynamic economies means when we want to evaluate and monitor the effects, the results, and the sustainability, the impact of our public sector international interventions. It means decisions of UNCCD or decisions of other multilateral environmental agreements. We should consider this aspect dynamic. This one is dynamics. What in economics we call dynamic externalities and dynamic economies. The third remark is in relation to spin-off. In economic terms, externalities. I would be really happy to discuss and support your initiatives in terms of theoretical and methodological improvement, or we can say enrichment, because this one is a wonderful study. Enrichment of these studies, enlargement of these studies in terms of positive externalities. Because in this case, of course, this case is focused on some aspects. We are focusing also on positive externalities accruing out from the synergies and interactions between different conventions and policy agendas. Not only public awareness is an externality, there are many others, and we can think about the curricula design, etc., education, other ministries, other sectors.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you very much for this intervention. I would suggest that we give Alicia, first of all, the chance to react directly on this. And I perceived your offer to collaborate in this heavily. So let's follow up on this and see how we can, be fruitful for each other in terms of this topic in Rwanda. I don't know if you have worked in Rwanda particularly as well, or global. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So, to you.
Thank you very much. I couldn't agree with you more. I fully agree with you. And actually, the motivation behind this study, so theoretical motivation, was exactly look through at all this through the lens of transaction costs, and also how we can decrease those transaction costs, including by decreasing information asymmetries. That's why one of the aspects that we would like to look is how we can bring together all the information and make it public and that kind of things. In terms of externalities, much of the externalities, positive externalities so far that we captured are in the form of externalities coming from improved ecosystem services. But of course, as you rightly said, externalities would also range from public policy perspective. That one, of course, we can capture in terms of the theoretical narratives and description. It is very difficult to capture in terms of the quantified measurement of that. What is the externality amount in, for example, dollar terms of improved awareness rising? Probably one can do that, but requires probably a lot more time and focused attention to this question as well. But on all other issues, information asymmetries, transaction cost, externalities, positive externalities from land restoration in terms of ecosystem services, that's, I think, I'm fully on the same page with you. Thank you for these remarks and suggestions.
Okay, there is one other remark I will give room to, and then we have to continue with our program. Otherwise, we'll get in trouble time-wise. We have a big panel I want to invite on stage.
Thanks so much. Great presentation. My name's Tom Hammond. I'm just curious, two quick questions. One is, perhaps in the Rwanda example, were you able to determine if there was any measurable impact from all of the investments in restoration in Rwanda in terms of the country's GDP? I mean, I understand fully that GDP is not a very good measure, particularly for what we're trying to achieve in this community here. But it's used extensively, and a great deal of government policy is based on GDP. So I'm just curious if there was any blip in GDP there. And secondly, were you able to distill out any particular actions or prerequisites or incentives that helps to accelerate restoration on the ground? Thanks.
Okay, Alicia, are you going to reply?
Thank you very much, Tom, for this question. Most of the studies looking at the impacts of land restoration, they are now capturing the biophysical impacts in terms of now, for example, if you read EUCN reports, you see 1.2 million hectares of land restored in Rwanda out of their 2 million hectares promised, so that kind of thing. And as a matter of fact, remotely sensed data corroborates to some extent that information. You can see that Rwanda land use change was not degrading. There's a lot of this positive land use change from remotely sensed data. So maybe it is difficult to tell. If it's 1.2 million hectares, you need to do a lot more detailed study for that. But overall, that sounds like a kind of it corroborates the pictures. In terms of GDP impact of land restoration activities, I've seen there are studies which modeled what would be the future potential impact on GDP. done by the Ministry of Economy and Finance. The current state minister there is actually one of the co-authors in those papers. Yeah. But it is a ex ante modeling. But it's not the measurement of what's already happened. So that kind of work does not exist. Probably it will come hopefully soon. In terms of what can accelerate actions, first and foremost, I think it's incentives to farmers. You see from this figure, all arrows go to farmers. All roads lead to farmers. Farmers are the implementers. So they need to have incentives. And once, for example, through different payments for ecosystem services or participation in the carbon trading. I heard yesterday from Ani that there's a farmer in Rwanda who is getting paid by Microsoft for carbon. So that sort of things, so that farmers make it into a business model on their own, and they wouldn't need any projects coming from different places investing into this land restoration. So that's biggest incentive is how to provide this kind of monetary incentives to farmers to make money out of land restoration. That's, I think, important thing. Thank you.
So I would like to move to the next agenda point here today. I would like to invite our panelists to join us up here. First of all, I want to introduce you to Annie Kairaba. Sorry, Jamal, you come next. Annie is Executive Director of the Rwanda Initiative for Sustainable Development, which does policy research and advocacy, especially in land policy and land rights. Welcome, Annie. It's great to have you here. Then I would like to invite Jamal Anagigliova. Jamal is Forest Biodiversity Officer at the CBD Secretariat. And before joining CBD, Jamal was Regional Liaison Officer for Central and Eastern Europe at the UNCCD. So there is a very interesting connection between these two secretariats. I would like to invite Sasha Alexander to come up here. Sasha is Policy Officer at the UNCCD Secretariat and focuses on the role of sustainable land management and ecosystem restoration for the UNCCD. Our fifth panelist is Dirk Nemitz. He's not here with us today, but he submitted video statements for us. So Dirk works in the Transparency Division of the UNFCCC Secretariat, and there he is team leader for agriculture, forestry, and land use. And Dirk, in his previous work, Dirk also focused on the Warsaw Framework for REDD+ and the Koronivia joint work on agriculture. And then last but absolutely not least, I would like to invite Heike Henn to come up here. Heike is Director for Climate, Energy, and Environment at the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany, and Heike has 30 years of professional experience in the field of development policy in different positions and perspectives, research, governmental and non-governmental organizations. So welcome to the panel, all of you. Thank you very much. I would love to start off with Annie. And Annie, with your initiative, in Rwanda, you work mostly on the local level with farmers. You know their perspectives. And as we saw in this graph Alicia showed, that all those roads lead to the farmers. By the way, it's the huge bubble in orange in the very bottom of this picture, where you see all those flashes going. So first of all, I would like to ask you, what are your general observations with regards to these findings in Rwanda, as you are very familiar with the Rwandan context and the institutional setup?
Thank you very much, Nina. General observation on this study is that it's highly appreciated from different stakeholders. First of all, this study is closely linked to food security. And I like this slide, which makes all roads leading to farmers. So like the Minister of State in the Ministry of Agriculture is looking very much forward on the outcome. Like Dr. Risha says, the mapping is going to show where restoration should mainly focus. Of course, land scarcity, high population in Rwanda contributes to this. And the study says the focus is going to be to the farmers in the farmlands, which actually, for Rwanda case, that would be the only area to focus on because of the land scarcity. The study now shows that over 60% own 0.2 hectares of land. So that's the only land that has to be nurtured. The institutional setting, I think what needs to be done here, what this slide portrays, is the focus would be with farmers. We talked about incentives. I think the engagement of farmers and the mobilization of different levels that the farmers should play a big role will ensure the achievement of the land restoration. And then I think somewhere Dr. Arisha talked about setting up an independent institution. Probably if we would be thinking of recommending a different institution setting at the country level, like REMA did. REMA came out of studies on mainstreaming land, and the recommendation was we should have an independent REMA to monitor environment. And true, we've seen benefits. So I think if this one can be also pursued, probably it would be more meaningful in terms of achievement. Probably I will stop there on the general observation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annie. So as next, I would like to address my next question to Heike Henn. As Germany is an important bilateral donor and development partner for many countries. So from this perspective, and from your personal experience in working with those countries, what challenges and effective approaches for synergies and policy coherence do you see? And what is needed from development cooperation to support synergies at national level?
Thank you very much. And it's great that we have such an audience on the last day or almost last day. And it's really good to see your interest. And thank you so much for this preliminary results of the study. I really found them very interesting. And I got even some thoughts on how to translate your findings on the key elements to at the beginning of the process with targets and monitoring and evaluation that could also work in other instances where we within the German government think how can we be more efficient working with different institutions and where are really the key points to influence. So thank you so much for bringing us all together. And I think from the German perspective, we are key supporters of all conventions. And at the same time, we see really the challenges for countries like Rwanda to deal with those challenges. And thank you so much, Annie, for sharing your initial thoughts on this. And I think what we need to do as a partner for countries like Rwanda to provide finance. I mean, the CBD, the COP is also about finance, but also support the different elements regarding efficient and effective integrated support. And I think the ingredients are definitely alignment with what countries like Rwanda, ideally in an integrated policy approach, strategy approach, line out over the 3 conventions. Support in all what we do, coordination, and not, I mean, I could envisage also us speaking with different ministries in Rwanda or other countries, and not even ourselves coordinating, and just in a negative way supporting silos by having on our side as well not an integrated approach. So I think it would be really something that we have to support an integrated approach in talking to partners and in the instruments we set up. But also we internally have to speak to each other in order to achieve this. And before the session, I was talking briefly to Nina, and she said, our program is in a different department than the climate and biodiversity division is. And I think there it starts already also on our side. And I think one maybe last point I would like to mention here is also the incentives. I think in country, I could imagine that it's for the farmers, but also for the institutions. You have to give a clear signal that you want this approach. And you have to also give incentives for everybody engaging in this integrated approach, that they go the extra mile, that it means, oh no, I'm in my department, in my institution, why do I have to call Nina? So I rather stick to my business. And I think really setting up the right incentives to work together. But let me add one point also, the incentives to find the most efficient way of a division of labor in an integrated approach. Because I think what every country, and specifically countries that struggling also with capacity constraints, what they cannot do is do all of the things that are needed to work on the 3 conventions at the same time by all actors. So really, I mean, like I understood the preliminary results, identify the key entry points and leave the rest to the respective institutions, but make sure that everything else is in a very aligned and then at the same time efficient way. And I think, and we on our side have to make sure that we don't contradict what a country tries to achieve in an aligned way. So it's a really, I think, very exciting discussion, important to have, and kindly excuse I have to run due to the facilitation for the resource mobilization, and sorry for that.
Thank you very much, Heike. And of course, you are excused. And thanks for your commitment, for coming, and for your very valuable remarks here. We will take them up. And good luck. So I'll turn to Jamal, continuing our panel discussion. So Jamal, looking to this debate from the CBD's perspective, and also keeping in mind there's a global biodiversity framework, which is, you know, in its last steps of being negotiated. So this new biodiversity framework will very likely direct an ambitious quantified target to land restoration as well. And so there is a significant overlap, meaning both a challenge, but also a huge potential for synergies. So can you a little bit reflect on this, having heard from Alicia's preliminary findings, and also, you know, these processes and things happening at conventions level right now? What are possible entry points you see to make this overlap in land related targets, with LDN and with climate targets, a true window of opportunity.
Yes, thank you very much, Nina, and thank you for inviting to this dialogue session. I'm glad to see that our discussion, which took place a year ago, now is fruiting even the preliminary results, but very interesting and very promising. So congratulations, Alisher, with the study. To give the few quick remarks, I think the study is on the right path. What would be interesting to see is how we would bring those more the results of the study, how we will translate it in a more kind of a guidance type of document, even for the focal points, which for focal points of all convention, which they could then use for the new stage of renewing commitments under the 3 Rio Conventions, but also under other international processes. And I think especially looking on those 2 areas which were highlighted in yellow, the design of the restoration targets and the monitoring. I think if you would I understand that you will continue researching, and if that 2 areas of collaboration where the cost efficiency could be higher from the integrated approach, so that results would be very welcome. But talking about the synergies and what are the opportunities, and also building from what I heard on the preliminary outcomes of the studies, 3 points I want to make. First of all, is building from the differences. So Rio Conventions still have a different mandate and very distinctive different mandates. And talking about the differences between UNCCD and CBD, I think it was very obvious what we heard today. UNCCD talks about land, CBD talks about ecosystems. We're talking about restoring ecosystem services and functions, or we're talking about restoring ecosystem integrity. Restoring ecosystem services and functions, especially in productive landscape, can take a few years. So you apply agroecological practices, regenerative agricultural practices, and you basically restore your productivity in a sustainable way, and I don't know, 5-6 years. But restoring ecosystem to the level, to the natural state, can take decades. So, and even if we look in the land degradation neutrality target of the UNCCD, which is, of course, expands through the whole restoration continuum. Really, it's about restoring the natural ecosystem. It's about restoring the productive landscape. But if you unpack the land degradation neutrality targets, you would see that 2/3 of them, they come on the productive landscape from sustainable land management. And this is logical because UNCCD is about people. It's about restoring livelihoods, supporting livelihoods, and increasing resilience of local communities. So it's not surprising then that when UNCCD talks, but I will not take the floor for UNCCD, that we're talking about really building the resilience of local communities. Food security, we heard that this is very important. And in Rwanda case, which I think would be applicable to so many countries in different regions, it's the agricultural productivity. We were talking about the croplands and rangelands. So now it brings us back to the global biodiversity framework, which is, I think, will be negotiated, like the last round of the negotiations today. So if we look at the area-based targets on the GBF and the goal 1, it's about restoring and enhancing ecosystems, so integrity and the connectivity. And of course, Alisher, you mentioned the biodiversity benchmarks are important, those safeguards, so in everything what we're doing. And if we take the area-based targets of the GBF, and I'm talking here about the target 1 on biodiversity inclusive spatial planning, target 2 on the restoration, target 3 on protected areas, but also target 10 on sustainable agriculture. So I think those area-based target is really a package where would so nicely complement with what UNCCD and UNFCCC in terms of the commitments. Because, and I agree here with the key messages of the study, that everything starting from the spatial planning. So, and for the country, the integrated spatial planning should really start from the way how all that commitments could be planned and mapped within a country's territory. And it was also a very interesting observation that in Rwanda, when you sum up all the restoration commitments, you end up, with the area that is larger than the country's territory. So obviously they overlap. So, and since we also hear now in the negotiations that the GBF, the new global biodiversity framework, should really take a balance between conservation, restoration, and sustainable use. So we're in a very good moment of convergence of those elements, which we really would like to have for the land and for the ecosystems. So, and that would start, of course, at the country level. Since still the conventions come with the different mandates, different priorities, which overlap in some extent, but we also come with the different methodologies. Another interesting observation was the difference, right, between the carbon, soil organic carbon, and the soil matter. So those kind of differences, if you will start unpacking the methodology, you will definitely find them. So what is needed to be done is really to find where do we converge and do we complement the 3 different conventions. So as far as I know, that methodology does not exist yet. So it would be really good if we could think and build on the results of this economic perspective to what those countries which really would like to have those, the joint co-creation of this special planning. So if they would have that methodology, that would be great. And I think those kind of special planning, it's not only about biodiversity or agriculture, it's about sustainable development, because that will be the master plan for the countries, how they will plan the infrastructure development. So, and all those elements would be then nicely figured out on those maps. So, and my final point here is that I think with this year of 2022, when we had the UNCCD COP, we had the climate change COP, and now the CBD, so we really come out from those COPs with the good decisions. So each convention adopts the decisions, but then we need more interactions between the secretariats and also between the focal points, among the focal points in the country level, where they actually start cross-checking the decisions, and they will find out that there is a very good, a solid mandate for us to collaborate among the secretariats, for which we have the mechanism of the joint liaison group, but also at the country level, so that those priorities of the convention would be taken in an integrated way. So I would not give the details of the decisions, but I think that will be our task in January. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jamal. A lot of substance in your intervention, and I would love to have more time to react on this and to have the other panelists directly react to those points you've raised. So we will definitely need another exchange next year and see how we can continue this work together and go more into detail in these different elements and aspects which have been raised here already, but we only have a quarter of an hour left, so we need to continue. I would love to address the next question to Sasha from the UNCCD Secretariat. I'd like to quote Ibrahim Chiao, your executive secretary from UNCCD, who said at the side event on synergies, also in the Rio Conventions Pavilion, which took place in COP27, where he said, also reflecting about, okay, how can we enhance synergies among the three conventions? And he said the secretariats work together, but the real action must come from national level and from national planning processes. So it goes in the same direction as what we discuss here today. But those processes at country level need to be incentivized and need to be practically supported. So, Sasha, I would, we've heard from the results in Rwanda and also the different interventions from the other panelists here. And I would like to ask you, what are incentives with which the UNCCD Secretariat and its global mechanism is supporting such synergistic approaches to the national Rio agendas in countries? So also looking from the Secretariat's perspective, the convention's perspective, to this endeavor to enhance synergies at countries level. Could you just share a little bit with us what UNCCD Secretariat and the global mechanism is doing to support this process?
Yeah, thank you, Nina. And I will be very brief because Jamal has hijacked the majority of my speaking notes. So thank you for that, Jamal. Just to begin, I would like to say that I think that this, the new global biodiversity framework will open a new chapter in the Rio synergies, or we may even talk about complementarities or other, just working together. So Jamal has highlighted targets 1, 2, and 3, which are very much in line with what the UNCCD is building capacity and helping countries to mobilize resources for. But in terms of incentives, we need to incentivize communication. We need to incentivize institutional collaboration, both at the global and at the national level. The Joint Liaison Group is a mechanism for the secretariats at the global level to share experiences, to give guidance on future work, future joint work streams. So that is something that we need to take advantage of, and we need to, I think, make it more effective and more impactful, so that it really trickles down to the national level, and so that countries can see what is coming out of that group. And I think that my colleague from Climate Change will have some ideas for that. In terms of the global mechanism, which is our resource mobilization arm of the UNCCD, there are a number of priorities, but overall, you can think of it in terms of helping countries to design projects and programs that are attractive to both investors and to donors. So we have an LDN fund, Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, which looks at the multiple benefits of larger scale projects, and then looks at blended finance to make those projects happen. In the global mechanism itself, we have the transformative projects and programs, where you are looking at project design and looking at the enabling factors that will make that project successful. So one of the things that we've been talking about a lot about, restoration, implementation, spatial planning, but there's a lot of governance issues that come into play, institutional issues, power dynamics that need to be addressed in order to facilitate this type of mapping and coordination. And so the Global Mechanisms Transformative Projects and Programs initiative looks at gender responsiveness. How is gender responsiveness included in the design of a project? Tenure security. How is access to land and resources included in that project? and as well as other issues that come to play, youth, other stakeholders that are disenfranchised. What role can they play in these restoration initiatives? So that's from the global mechanism side. And then finally, from the Secretariat itself, we are tasked and mandated through our COP decisions to help countries build capacity and make progress on many policy fronts. So we have 75 countries that are looking at drought management plans. So drought management restoration is a proactive tool to reduce drought impacts and increase resilience. So that's very much part of our work. We are working with FAO very closely in following up with these land tenure decisions, which is UNCCD being the only multilateral environmental agreement that has embraced and recognized that land tenure is a fundamental priority for making progress towards all three Rio Conventions. And then a number of other policy issues, sand and dust storms, urban-rural linkages, which we released a video yesterday in the subnational pavilion with UN Habitat. So all these global partnerships are coming together. We as a Secretariat are very small, so we need to engage with our partners, both globally, regionally, and at the national level to really build that capacity. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to hearing from our climate change colleague.
Thank you, Sasha, very much. I'm sure that Annie would love to start the conversation with you now, talking about land tenure rights and how important this is to achieve the land-based Rio target for all three conventions. So we will definitely have to continue this conversation in another setting. So looking at the time, and obviously there's already a lot happening at the World Cup final play, so we have to compete with this. We have a last speaker on our panel. He is not with us, unfortunately, but we have the chance to listen to him on the video. So I asked him from the UNFCCC perspective what potential benefits he would see arising from a stronger alignment of national implementing strategies for climate, biodiversity, and land at national level, and which framework conditions he thinks are needed so that this can happen, and also what international agencies can do to support those framework conditions. So here's his reply.
Interesting question. And thank you for allowing me to intervene by this video message as well. My sincere apologies that I can't join you in person in Montreal today. On the question, my team in the UNFCCC Secretariat works specifically on agriculture, forestry, and land use. While there's been some attention to these areas in the climate process, I think there's still lots of space for improvement. Agriculture is very important, but at the same time extremely vulnerable and not always efficient. Helping farmers to optimize practices that lead to lower waste, lower pollution, and lower greenhouse gas emissions while increasing resilience is a priority also for global food security. Coming to forests, we will not reach the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Agreement if countries don't effectively address deforestation. This is a fact. There are also other important ecosystems, such as peatlands, that also need further conservation, which will have effects for other convention goals as well. Now, in my view, looking at land through the lens of all three Rio Conventions and their objectives, this will show how much more benefits can be achieved in this sector than in any other sector, also for local livelihoods and for global public goods. The synergies are extremely important and will show the true value of investing in sustainable management of our land and ecosystems. Knowing where these synergies are strongest will enable countries to make decisions that can attract more resources on the one hand, and then lead to more impactful implementation, unlocking the value of healthy ecosystems for the objectives of all three Rio Conventions. I believe that all framework conditions that are needed are in place for countries to act, especially with a good outcome that we expect now of COP15. International agencies can then support countries in bringing the right actors together to explore these discussions in the countries where these discussions must happen at the national level, taking into account different national circumstances, and which will likely lead to different options and ideas in different countries. But I think that's the way forward to make progress on the implementation of all three conventions together. And we look forward to seeing this progressing. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that was the final statement from our panel discussion. Unfortunately, we've come to an end of our side event here. We have prepared for another round of questions, but unfortunately we don't have time. So we have to postpone this to the next exchange we will organize for next year, when the final results of the Rwanda study are available and we can continue our exchange on this. And I will just try to capture what we've heard, what are, like some kind of wrap up of our discussion here today. And I heard that there are different levels where we can tackle the action and support action towards synergies, towards policy coherence among the Rio Conventions. And of course, there where we have to focus on most is the country level, but also the conventions and the secretariats can do their part to support this. And for instance, with this joint liaison group, also, when I talked to Dirk Nemitz, he also proposed in his other statement, which we can't hear now, unfortunately, because of time restrictions, he's also suggesting that this joint liaison group could be supported by a task force, which is more on technical level, which has the capacity to work on these issues conceptual-wise and to prepare those meetings of the joint liaison group, which is really at very high political level. So also such a task force could jointly work to have this cross-conventional work on cross-cutting issues like forests, like gender, and other very relevant issues, and also on procedural questions regarding monitoring and evaluation, and maybe such a joint map for land restoration, for instance. So such a task force supporting the joint liaison group among the conventions would be probably a very interesting and effectful structure. So there are different levels where we can tackle. We also heard that incentives are very key. We need to incentivize at different levels stakeholders, actors, to change the way they work and they proceed. So those incentives are, on the one hand, looking at farmers where all the action practically takes place. So we need to take this level into account, but also to see how to incentivize finance, or finance mechanisms have a huge lever to incentivize, just like, for instance, Jeff 8 with its integrated approach, asking very concretely for policy coherence in those project proposals, and also to expect a clear monitoring of how projects funded by Jeff are having positive impact on all three Rio Conventions. So these are new approaches which provide real incentives for change, for coherence, and to bring this challenge forward. And also this aspect of joint data, joint information sharing, and a better coordination among institutional structures at all levels as well. We heard from Heike from BMZ, even we have to, no, not even, that's not the right way to frame it, but we need to look at all sides how coordination and an overcoming of silos can be done and fruitful to bring this topic forward. So really looking at institutional structures, institutional setups is also a very important aspect here for this endeavor, and good collaboration and communication, of course. So I have to stop here. I would love to continue talking. It's a huge and very exciting topic. I want to thank the audience for being with us, for your interest in this topic, and to favor this one compared to the World Cup final game. But we can now all go there and look at the final. But most of all, I want to thank Alicia for presenting this very, very striking first results of the study. We are looking forward to seeing the final results beginning of next year. And of course, I want to thank Annie and Jamal, Sasha, and also Heike, who even came here. Oh, is it Argentina or France? It would be interesting to know. Anybody knows? It's not. So thank you very much. I close here. Have a wonderful day. And we continue with this topic. And it would be wonderful to have you as audience next time when we talk about this issue. Thank you very much.